In our previous video, we imported the 10 file from Select Series 2 over to a terrain model in Select Series 3. The next step in our process for bringing forth an SS2 project is to import the baselines. So to do this, we want to go ahead and start up Power GeoPack, and we're going to make a new file. Make sure to select the 2D seed file now, and I'll call this geometry, and we'll open that. Now before we begin to import our geometry, there's a little bit of house cleaning that we want to take care of. So the first thing is to verify that we have the right drawing scale set. So settings, drawing scale, and this will control the text size, station tick mark size, etc. on your baselines. And so I'm going to be doing this project at a 1:50 scale or a 1:600 ratio. The next thing we want to do is to go ahead and reference our existing terrain model. So Tools, Attach, and we'll attach our existing ground file. The default, accept those. And then we'll close that, and then we'll do a fit view and make this terrain model active. So we'll select the terrain model boundary, and on the context sensitive toolbar, set this as the active terrain model. And we will then save settings. Lastly, before we begin the import process, we need to create a new GPK file. So I will go to Coordinate Geometry, and I'm going to create a new job number 999. So we'll select yes, and then we'll close Coordinate Geometry. I want to take just a moment to explain why we're making a brand new GPK file and not using the GPK file from Select Series 2. The Select Series 2 GPK file should be considered your master geometry backup, if you will. What we're going to be doing is importing information from the ALG file, not the GPK file, because the ALG file also contains any plane graphics that you might have used on your Select Series 2 project to target individual entities in your templates. And so by importing from the ALG file, we get a double benefit. Number one, it will contain all of our plane graphics, and we can directly bring those into and create civil geometry. And secondly, the parent-child relationship between horizontal baselines and vertical profiles is already established in the ALG file, which is also a geometry database file, but in a format such that Roadway Designer can take advantage of. And so when we import from the ALG file, because we are using some features that are set to export back to native, in our case the GPK file because we're using GeoPack, it's going to be asking us for the GPK file that we want to sync with our plane graphic civil geometry. And so we're going to create this new GPK file, which will essentially mirror our baseline work that we're importing and working on in the DGN. In Select Series 3, essentially all geometry is worked on in the DGN file format, and anything that has a property set to export back to native will also update the GPK file as those edits are made. And so we want to leave the master GPK file from Select Series 2 alone, just in case we ever had to go back to it. But the import process from the ALG will generate a new GPK file with our geometry. So now that we have that GPK file created, we may now proceed over to import our geometry. So over in our task, we will select Import Geometry, and we will select our ALG file that we previously prepared in our folder structure. And once this loads, we can expand under the alignment category, and we want to select the MoDOT baseline feature here. Now, you may have some other baselines in here, we're going to import our plane graphics into another DGN file in our next step. In this particular file, we only want to bring forth our baselines just to keep them separate and neat. But one thing that we don't want to do when we're importing geometry is we want to avoid importing existing ground profiles. There's really not a reason to bring those forth because we have an active terrain model. When we open up the geometry profile view for that any particular alignment, that existing ground profile will be there and will match up with what we had in Select Series 2. And all we would have to do is give it a name if we needed access to that particular file or that particular profile. So what we're going to do is expand this category, and we have about 7 different baselines here that utilize an existing profile, and we're going to tell it not to import those. And so let's go ahead and select those. The first one is under this particular baseline. I'm going to toggle off the existing profiles, and then we have 4 ramps that we want to turn off the existing profile. Ramp 1, ramp 2, 3, and 4, and then route 13. And lastly, route 82. There's not anything wrong with importing the existing profiles, but it's going to make the process take a lot longer, and this will really optimize the importing. As it stands now, when we go to import this, it's probably going to take about 5 minutes, roughly, on my computer. And so it does take a while because we're essentially writing every piece of geometry out to a land.xml file, and then we're importing that in the background and creating Select Series 3 civil geometry, and then exporting that back to our brand new GPK file. So there's a lot going on in here. In addition, we're also creating civil rules where we can. I say where we can because there is a limitation as to how many PIs that we actually can create civil rules to make the geometry and take on the ability to be edited on the fly. And generally speaking, horizontal geometry is not a problem. Profiles may be a problem if you have literally hundreds or maybe over 1,000 PIs. So if you do see a message that says a profile is too complex to create rules, it doesn't really hurt anything because the profile will still be imported. It will be usable for your corridors. But if you go to edit it, you may have to do a little bit additional work if those rules aren't on there. So don't be alarmed if you do see a message in there saying certain individual geometry entities are too complex to create rules on. Now there is configuration variables in the workspace that allow you to loosen those restrictions. But when you do that, it does tend to slow down the processing of your corridors if you have geometry that is very complex with hundreds of rules. And so we've set that to where right now it should cover most of the cases. But if you get into a situation, don't hesitate to ask for support on that particular entry that you need to have those rules, and we can look at those configuration variables at another time. So now we're going to go ahead and start the import process. And when we do, it's going to prompt us for the GPK file that we created. So we'll select it, and the import process is now going to resume. Now this will take a few minutes, so I'm going to pause the video and restart when this is complete. Now that the import process has completed, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the line weights in here to make this just a little bit easier to look at. So as we window in here and take a look at some of our geometry, you'll see that it all came in fine. The next thing I want to take a look at is making sure that we have the proper active profile set for each geometry element, and we do that in Project Explorer. And so under the Civil Model tab, I'm going to go ahead and pin this so that we can view under linear. You're going to see all of the baselines here. And your Civil Model tab in Project Explorer is your window into all of the geometry or anything as far as that goes in Select Series 3 that has been drawn. But one of the examples I want to show here is on the alignment Route 13, which is here. I'm going to expand this one and expand the profile assigned to that alignment. And this was one of those that actually in Select Series 2, the existing profile was what was used for the corridor development. And so that profile, because we didn't import it, as I said, it's not the best practice to import existing profiles. We want to actually create that profile. And so to create that profile, what we will do on that particular baseline is we will right click on the entry and select Open Profile Model, and then I'm going to pick a view to open, and then I'm going to select inside that view. And because we made our referenced terrain model active, you can see the existing green dashed line here for our existing profile. All we need to do for that is to select that profile, and I'm going to go to the Quick Properties, and we're going to give it the same name that was used in Select Series EXRTE13, and we'll tab out of that to accept it. And so now that name has been set to that profile, and then all we at this point have to do is select it again, allow that context toolbar to come up, and then we want to set that as the active profile. And so now you'll see over here in Project Explorer that that profile is going to be generated when it's refreshed. And as we created the profile, the refresh does not automatically happen until another command is executed, and that will then force this tab and Civil Model to be updated. But you will see now that we have the active profile exist RTE13 set on that particular alignment. The rest of the existing profiles that we did not incorporate were for the Business 13, the 4 ramps, and Route 82. Those are not used as active profiles, and so the only thing that we would really need to do is to open those and create them, but we would not need to set them active. And so I will go ahead and do that, and then we will resume the video. If I wanted to put one of those existing profiles back into the GPK file, let's take for example ramp 4, which is one of those we did not import. I just right click and select to open the profile model, and I'll click in my view 2 here. I'll select that ground profile and then go to the Quick Properties, and I'll just put in the existing profile name here. That's required, and you need to follow the GeoPack rules for profile names here, obviously. I'm going to hit enter to accept that name, and then over here in our tools there is a export to native, and what you do then is you locate the element that you want to export back. And so this is ramp 4. I'm just going to select it and want to reset and ask for the job number, and it says OK. And so now we go into coordinate geometry just to show you in Navigator. Come down and we should see a profile here for exist ramp 4. And if I look at that, you will see it's a series of PIs based on the terrain model, which would match up what we had in Select Series 2. The very last step in the process for the geometry is you have to expand each alignment that you know has profiles associated with it, and make sure if it has more than one profile that the proper profile is set to active. And if it's not, you simply right click and you will have an option that says set active profile. So you need to make sure that's done for every baseline that's here that has a profile assigned to it. Make sure that the right one is set active. That's a very important step, so don't forget that. So that's the end of this particular exercise of bringing in the baselines, creating some existing profiles, and verifying the active profiles. In the next video, we're going to be taking a look at importing our plan graphics geometry from the ALG file that we will use as targets in our corridor design.